Maidsafe is an interesting look at technology, and generally I could do this on a whiteboard much better. If you look at the system that we've got just now, we've got a server-based internet, so it's a centralised, lots of centralised components. One of the things that servers have got that will never be fixed is humans. You know, the corruption of the human is always going to destroy a system. So we've got a very unnatural sort of system in the internet at the moment, and I call it the internet, the thing above the cables, from layer 3 all the way through to the person is what I'm referring to with the internet. And I designed a server thing years ago called eBoxit, and it was an all-in-one server. And I tried to commercialise it in Scotland and had little success because it needed a lot of cash. A company called Cube made an exact copy, reduced the functionality and sold it for $3 billion to Sun. But during that time I realised that these servers, they were basically self-managing. It was a disk you put in any machine, and a minute and a half later it was a custom version of Red Hat type installer, Anaconda and whatnot. I looked and thought, well, why do these things not connect to each other and back all each other's data up and share services between them? And then, as I say, I couldn't get funding for it, and took time off and thought, there's something there, there's something interesting about removing servers, removing administrators, removing all the shit basically that goes with servers, because it fundamentally is all crud. And it took a couple of years to think about it and thought, the problem with servers, the problem with securing servers is servers. So if you remove servers, you can give 100% security to servers. If you remove passwords from a network, you've got 100% password security on the network, because they don't just exist. You're never going to have them stolen. So this is the kind of way that we were thinking. Reverse everything. How do you fix the code? Well, don't get the code. You know, how do you fix a broke? Don't get a broken leg. So if you can remove passwords from a network, that's quite interesting. You're not going to get hacked that way. If you can remove servers from a network, you're not going to have server-based issues like denial of service attacks and administrators causing hassle. So I spent some time looking about at this, and looked a lot at nature actually, and folk laugh about this obsession I have with nature, and it's a sort of to do with Richard Feynman. I'm a big sort of Richard Feynman fan. And he quite rightly said, in the world of physics, if what you're doing can't be found in nature, it's just wrong. Right? So if you look at nature and try and find a server-based system, you won't find a server-based system in nature. So fundamentally, we were on the road to something that was more right than what currently existed. So removing servers seemed to be important to us. So we figured all that you would do then is connect all these computers together that's on everybody's desk. And there's a few facts. This was 2006, before everyone's going mobile. That if you take all the computers in everyone's desks and add them together, it dwarfs everything that Google, Facebook, Yahoo and all that can pull together. We actually are the network. So we started looking, thinking, right, we are the network, how are we going to do this? So again, look at it, the natural order of things, or how things work in nature, from an ant colony, or you know, the flock of birds or whatever. It becomes quite obvious that there's no central control in any of these systems. Everybody thinks a queen ant tells other ants what to do. She just lays eggs for 15 years. Neurons in the brain, you know, they're pretty simple things, but they do very simple things and create pretty complex things like Cousin law, carbon things. So look kind of further at the whole ant type thing and realise that ants are quite an interesting species. They've been about for 150 billion years, and they're one of the most sophisticated and complex of all societies that we know of. And what they do is, there's a woman in Stanford called Deborah Gordon, of the Gordon Institute, which is a great big huge building in Stanford University. And she studied harvester ants for 20 years. She painted 20,000 of them with a Spanish paintbrush to figure out how they worked. I realised that there was 4 fundamental types of these ants. So there was like a forager, a cleaner ant, one that went and carried the food back, and a soldier ant. And how the ants operated always evaded us. We never really understood it until Deborah sussed this, that as an ant's leaving the colony, it says, well, I was a soldier ant yesterday, so I'm going to be a soldier today, so there's a forager, there's a carrier of food, there's a cleaner, there's a forager, there's a carrier of food, there's another soldier, and yet this pattern looks good. And it's a soldier again that day. If the next day that ant's going out, it's like there's a soldier, there's a carrier of food, there's a cleaner, there's a cleaner, there's a cleaner, oh, I'm becoming a cleaner now, there's a problem. The pattern's changed. And the persona of that ant will become a cleaner ant. And that's why if you take a bunch of stuff and put it in an ant nest, they'll all come out and clean it up, regardless of what they were going to do. So their persona changes. So that's all very interesting, but that to me was one of the cruxes of computing and complex systems. An ant on its own, you could put a drop of water on and drown it. You could just ping it off the table. But if you get 250,000 of them in here, they could probably kill us all or something. So they have this amazing complexity, but if you take that individual ant and look at it, it knows 4 things. It knows how to be a soldier, it knows how to be a cleaner, it knows how to be a forager, and it knows how to carry stuff back. So it carries out very fundamental rules, really simple rules, and it repeats those simple rules continually. You don't see many ants come back, well, I'm the best food carrier on the planet, and this huge ego thing. They have these very simple rules. And again, if you look at neurons in the brain, they're very simple devices. They're firing based on certain patterns and where they're located, and the electricity generation and whatnot. So these things, to me, were quite interesting, and we thought, well, that's the way computers should work. So to connect all the computers together, which would be quite bonkers, we could just do what nature does. We could make each computer follow a few simple rules, really simple rules, and repeat it 100% of the time, accurately. And based on different messages coming to different computers, the persona changes. The computer becomes a soldier ant, and a message coming in this direction, and a cleaner message going in that direction. And that allows us to build a network, which is a kind of interesting network, a network of nodes that the traffic itself shapes the network in real time. So this network, when you look at it, it looks like an alive thing. You can take it apart all the way, and the traffic there will change the dynamics of that network and look after data. So we added some rules into how Maidsafe should operate at the networking component, the kind of autonomous network, which is a third of the problem of creating a fully decentralized system. And these are sort of like Asimov rules, so each node will protect itself if it can. It'll protect data, just like an ant would protect food, which was the second rule, and the third rule was protect the network, like an ant would protect a colony. So if you've got food which is poison or data which is a virus, kill it, because that's bad for the network. If you can't kill it, kill yourself. That's the way it is. So looking at those sort of rules, that allowed us to bring together an autonomous network that was basically given a very simple task. Each node was given a very simple task per persona. One persona is store data and look after it. So that's what you do. You get a data store command coming from a certain direction, you store data. Another persona is you're a data manager, so someone's asking you to store data, you happen to be near the address of that data location, so you send it to a storing node. So you're a cleaner ant for a minute, you're managing where data is going to be stored. And there's about 7 personas involved altogether to make this network work properly. But each of those personas in their own right are very simple objects. They're not, so we're not building a kind of IBM Watson type thing with a huge big artificial intelligence. We're building a lot of stupid wee ants and putting them together. And that makes it a bit of an easier task. But then when you look at, right, how do we go from a server-based system where Google or Yahoo or AOL are looking after all our data the nice way that they do for us, to a system where all your data is everywhere? So the three fundamental problems that you have to solve, the middle one was an autonomous network, which is the whole Ant type thing. The first problem you have to solve is how can you make your data encrypted, beyond encryption, that you can give your worst bit of data to your most important bit of data to your worst enemy. So how could you give the nuclear launch codes to the Russians in this form? So we had to come up with an encryption mechanism, which is on our website. I'm not going to describe it fully, but basically it's an encryption mechanism that chunks data up, performs an AES encryption mechanism in the middle of it, not to encrypt it, to obfuscate it. The output of a good encryption mechanism should be random or certainly unique data or repeating data. And after that process, we do an XOR thing. So you end up with these chunks of data which are not a one-time pad, they're close to a one-time pad, they're obfuscated, so you can only guess them. There's no way to break the encryption algorithm and reverse this data. And it's analogous to, you take your file and break it into pieces of sand and scatter it across some of the beaches in the world. And people have to figure out what beach contains your bits of sand for that particular file and how they're going to get them all back together and reverse them. The the address space that this sand or these data fragments exist on is 2 to the 512, which is 10 to the 154. So 10 to the 80 is the number of atoms in the visible universe. So it's 10 to 20 is the number of grains of sand in the beaches of the world. So the address space that we've got this data in is basically the number of atoms in the visible universe squared divided by 10,000, so it's big. So it's a great big bunch of beaches with some sand on it that represent bits of your data, so you're going to have to do some magic to get that stuff back. The self-encryption itself has been through various universities now, and we've got a report on the attack vectors and the network and the encryption mechanism. It seems to be extremely powerful. In fact, we've got patents in that worldwide. So that gives us the ability to have very encrypted data, very highly encrypted data. The third part, which is one of the hardest parts when you think about it, is you've got a network that's going to look after data and protect it. You've got a way of taking your data and making it possible to put it public, that anybody can get it. So how do you log in? Where do you log into? So there's this network that doesn't like humans. There's no server. You can't log into a server. So we have to come up with a mechanism to allow you to log in. This is the third and final part of the network itself. So we come up with a self-authentication mechanism, which is pretty magical from a few perspectives. It's pretty simple as well. The initial way that works is when you start a vault and you're giving resources to a network, you can take the private key from that vault, which will allow you to store a bit of information. The bit of information that you store is a bunch of keys that allow you to get back on the network with a particular identity and the root directory of all your data. So you take that information, encrypt it, and store it on the network at a key defined by a password that you type in. So you type in 2 passwords. One password locates this data chunk on the network. The second password encrypts the value. So when you go to any other computer and put your first password in, the network can get this data value back, which is encrypted, and you decrypt it with your second password. And that self-encryption mechanism is key to the whole system, because that means what I've just described is a human making a deal with a network. I didn't ask Google there to go into that network. So once you're in the network, you can store data, share data, put structured data on it like Cassandra or whatever. Like Amazon run a very similar system called Dynamo to run the whole Amazon services, so you can have all the dynamic data you want and secure communications, secure email, secure chat. But you've made that deal with the network. Nobody else was involved in that deal with the network that you make to store your key information, which will allow you to go anywhere else and log in. It's just between you and the network. So that means nobody knows you're using it, nobody can ban you from using it, nobody can stop you doing whatever you want on the network. So it's a censor-proof, privacy-enhancing network, and that's exceptionally important. So that's really what Maidsafe is, and one of the reasons we got involved with the Bitcoin community was, how do you explain to people decentralization and what's the value in decentralization? One thing Bitcoin was able to do was show that if you take a decentralized approach to finance, what you basically do is take all the crud out of the middle. You don't need all those strange banky folk, and you can actually efficiently have someone pay for your labour or service at any point in the world. And if you decentralise internet services, you take out all that crud in the middle. You don't need to ask Google permission to send an email. You don't need to ask Dropbox permission to store data or whatever. So decentralisation, from a technical perspective, Bitcoin or Maidsafe, what you're actually doing is you're replacing humans with maths, and it's repeatable maths and validatable maths, and that means you're making society way more efficient, because 1 and 1's always 2. If 1 and 1 tells you it's something different for 2, you know it's lying. You know, maths is very repeatable, it's validatable. So with the whole push forward, what we're doing just now is we're really taking this to the rest of the world mostly, and showing them, look, here's a network which is a privacy enhancing, maths-backed network. And it's an internet, it's basically a new version of the internet. Bring all your ideas, all your product ideas, and build them on it. But the important part for us in doing this and getting forward is that if you imagine that Tim Berners-Lee owned HTTP, we wouldn't have the web. You know, if you've got company ownership of something, then you've got company ownership of it. It's not going to exist. So what we did a few months back was took all of the stuff we've worked on for 8 years and gave it to the community. So now the product that we've been working on belongs purely to the community. There's community websites and stuff, and they let us go on and chat about the thing that we worked on for all these years. And that seems a bit strange. And we raised a whole bunch of cash recently in a crowd sale with a cryptocurrency, which I won't get into. It's a cash version of Bitcoin. It's anonymous transfer of value. So the money we raised in the crowd sale was to allow us to get community hubs and train the people in those hubs and fund those hubs to compete with us on our software. And that's how you can take a project like this, remove the ego stuff from it because that's illogical, give the ownership to the rest of the world, and actually make sure that the best people are working on it, which may not necessarily be us. A very good chance it won't be us. And you've got to be big enough and brave enough to be able to accept that. And it's also another important thing that we strive all the time to do is if we don't innovate, we should die as a company. We've got a load of patents and stuff. If we ever stop anybody competing with us, we should go out of business. The whole point of moving the world forward is find the best people that do the best job and work with them to make sure that they do it. Don't put your competition out of business. Embrace the competition and do what we do, even fund it. Train them, give them money, give them every opportunity to beat you, because if they're better, they should be doing it. And what we're doing as a business, Maidsafe as a business, we're still working on the core. We've not released the network yet. That's going to be another few months. We're moving on to the next thing. So what can you do when you've got an actual privacy enhancing, distributed, decentralized network? You could do things like a global voting system, which is digitally secured. You could do things like, I'm pretty interested in this one, a global federated news system. So news that's gathered by all of the people of the world, voted and ranked on by all of the people of the world, and read back to every individual in the world through an avatar in their own language. Propaganda-free truth. These things start changing not just the technological side of our planet, but they actually will start changing the societal side of the planet, which is very important, because I believe when the Israeli guy sees the Palestinian guy and they both see the same news and all the rest of it, they're going to want to stop killing each other, and that's going to be a good thing. The global voting system, I'm sure we could have a vote and see if we want to go and bomb some country in the Middle East, and we won't. The third part of where we're going is a distributed autonomous intelligence network. So that's taking information that we know and the technology that we know, like Bitcoin or whatever. So an example would be you could have a couple of robots, we speak to Roborth about this, and you teach one over here French, and that one immediately knows French. And you teach this one here heart surgery, and that one immediately just jumps up and saves somebody's life. If you can have a network which is mathematically and cryptographically secured, that will allow machines to talk to each other and communicate through maths, you could start actually bringing the collective intelligence of machines together. And another simple example of that would be taxis. And this is where you've got the likes of Bitcoin or Safecoin, doesn't matter. So you got a taxi, maybe, that drives up, picks you up, you pay with your Bitcoin into its wallet address, it then drives about, takes you where you're supposed to go, and you jump back out again, then it goes to the garage with its wallet and fills itself up with electricity. It may drive into the repair centre with its wallet and get something fixed. Now these machines all talking to each other through an autonomous intelligence network would allow them to drive the costs of things like taxi fares down and efficiency way up, because as a collective they're not going to send the crappy taxi to go and pick someone up because it's too expensive. They can provide a better service. So once you start bringing machines together, you can actually start using capitalism probably properly as it was intended to do. It was to evaluate exactly how efficient certain systems are and take the inefficiencies out of those systems. And one of the efficiencies you might have noticed with the taxi company was there's no taxi owners. People will build these things, get paid for them, the taxi will pay it back, and then they own themselves. Machines should start owning themselves. So our future in terms of where the Maidsafe network is, basically in this distributed intelligence and looking at things like voting systems and news systems. And everybody else, I think, is going to be involved by, we've got builders on the network, so these are people who will take the likes of Reddit or all the various services that are there just now and put them onto this new privacy enhancing network, which should be faster, it certainly should be private, should be free. And a nice side effect is, if you're a builder on the Maidsafe network and you're an application developer and you build an application and people use it, the network can tell that people are using your application and will actually send Safecoin to your wallet. So open source developers probably for the first time can develop something that's really valuable, and if it's used and is valuable to the people, the network can spot it and pay them. So you don't have an open source developer that has to turn into a marketing guy or a support guy or whatever. If he's brilliant at developing code, pay him for developing code. And that's a pretty exciting side effect of the whole Safecoin thing, that we actually have a system that can pay builders. For the normal user perspective, we'll be launching a product which will be interesting. You'll download this product, it will look like Dropbox, but it won't be infinite size, that's not a possible thing. It will have an 8.4 exabyte size or something, whatever the 2 to the 64 is. Free, completely free. It should be fast, it should be faster than Dropbox, with built-in messaging and all the rest of it, and think, well, this is a great user experience. And then you should notice there's a wallet. The thing started earning you money, so you have downloaded free software that you're going to get paid. And you're not getting paid for using the software. What's actually happening is part of your computer's been given to the network, and that network is repaying you for the resources that you're supplying to the network. So the whole thing starts distributing resources across the world in a much more efficient manner, and it also should drive down the cost of the resource, because you're actually getting paid for something you weren't using anyway. Somebody else is going to be using that, but you're still getting paid for it. So there's some really nice side effects when you look at what the Maidsafe network's doing. But I think where it's going is going to be pretty exciting, and the fact that it's happening in Scotland, or started in Scotland, I think is brilliant. It's absolutely brilliant. And we've got now hundreds of folk that are interested in the project and signed up and all the rest throughout the world. And we really need to get folk in Scotland signed up to start working on this and change the rest of the world. I previously was a mechanical engineer, and I don't know how many you guys know, but there's a universal flux equation where you can derive F equals MA and V equals IR from it. Scotland had the best mechanical engineers in the world, the F equals MA guys. There's no reason that the V equals IR guys can't be the best in the world. I mean, why are we not the best computer scientists in the world? Why are we not producing the best stuff in the world? We've obviously got the logical brain for it. We proved that through the mechanical area. So we really need, I think, to all get together and work together and promote each other and help each other and get this thing done and promote the country, promote Scotland. The rest of the world's beating the hell out of us, guys, because we've got folk from all over the world on our mailing list and whatnot. And we've maybe got some of the best people in the world, maybe in this room, but we've certainly got them in this country. And this is what I'm really keen on, that we all figure out what each other's projects are and help each other. But that's all I've got to say.
That's a good amount.
That was a lot.
One thing was great. I mean, David's really spoken pretty thoroughly about what we're about at a kind of appropriate level, I think. The other things that we're doing is we're also got these developer pods, so it would appear illogical for us to be a decentralized company or internet promoter to then keep a centralized company structure. So what we're doing is we've got a couple of guys actually over hiding at the back there, over to see us in Paris and Brussels. Yeah, Chris and Ben. And so what they are representing is the start of us trying to decentralise the knowledge that we hold at Maidsafe. So starting to make these developer pods happen in different parts of the world. So we have the kind of guys starting off in Europe. We also have a fairly active kind of crowd building up in San Francisco. With a girl named Paige out there who's pretty influential in that scene. And it's interesting coming along tonight because the first time, or the only time I've come along to the Edinburgh meetup, was that the first one in January?
Yes.
It was the first one. It's come a long way just in 3 or 4 months already. It's interesting, they were talking about their San Francisco meetup, and it's 250 members, like going twice a week, I think it's twice a month they go. It just shows you, like, I mean, the scene here is really, really building. You can tell that in just a few months, but the scene in America is massive, so it shows you the currency's got legs for sure. We're getting our developer pod set up in San Francisco as well, so things hopefully for Maidsafe, it's important, as David says, to make sure that Scotland is well represented, but I think for our technology to have the biggest impact, it really needs to spread across the world, and that's what we're focusing on. I think you covered all the good stuff. Someone had the scraps at the end.
Any questions?
Millions. Not letting you away with that. You said the Safecoin. I'll not go into that.
Mm-hmm.
Basically, you're doing this thing that's going to change the world.
Yeah.
And then, just as a side project, you've done another thing that doesn't include the blockchain.
Yeah. Yeah, well that again is looking at nature again, and I've spoke to a lot of folks, there's a lot of projects happening in Bitcoin that all build on the blockchain. And again, looking at natural systems, we're looking at decentralized systems. How can you have all these decentralized systems centralized on a particular data structure, like a blockchain? So to me, if you look at the world that we're in, the globe or the planet we live in, it's a fantastic teacher. It's full of decentralized systems, none of which rely on each other. They coexist, and they may codepend on each other at a particular point in time, but they don't link. So to me, the blockchain, and in fact I spoke about this recently in Amsterdam, people in the Bitcoin community have to stop praying to that blockchain. To me, it reminds me of that time travelling thing where the trumpet goes off and you go and get eaten by these strange underground people. You know, decentralised system should stand on its own without a doubt. The blockchain itself, to me, is a design pattern. It's a good design pattern. It's based on Lambert signature blocks and the kind of hash cache type thing of Beck. So it is a good system. If you don't have a really strong peer-to-peer network and you say, right, here's a spreadsheet, we'll just share it about everybody, make sure everybody updates that's a really good system. The proof of work thing works for it exceptionally well, but it's not all that natural, because if you look at an ant colony, as I was saying earlier on, that guy who's deciding that he was going to convert from a soldier ant to a cleaner ant, didn't go asking the whole rest of the colony. You know, and when you see the swallows flying in some murmuration, when one's going to turn right, they don't go, nah, I'm going to turn right, can you tell everybody? So the distribution of knowledge is an interesting thing in nature. If you look at us, I mean, I've talked to you guys, maybe some of you will repeat it in the pub later, but this lunatic for the West Coast. And that knowledge distributes is through a society or a community, as it should. The really interesting things go far, the really not interesting things don't go all that far. So a natural system, to me, means that everybody doesn't go to one point and speak in that one blockchain, that information and that intelligence can be distributed through the network. There's issues with that because you don't want to be the ant that gets squished if it's holding a Safecoin or something like that. So what we've had to do is come up with a thing called consensus chains, and this is something we're doing some maths on just now. It's a nightmare to do maths on it, but a group of 4 close nodes will hold some information, and deterministically another, so that group of 4 close nodes could be ABC, the hash of ABC is another group of 4 nodes close to ABC, then the hash of that's another group, so this is the chain. That deterministic chain means a targeted attack on a bit of data requires targeting specific, so it's like the reverse of the birthday paradox. So that gives you an ability to secure information by using a very small proportion of the whole network. You don't need to tell every single person, look, I own this coin or whatever. So Safecoin is based on those principles. It's based on a decentralized data container. So Bitcoin is looking to move to more decentralized, looking at a Merkle tree type implementation, but it's still a centralized root. So we looked and said we don't want to do that, we want everything to be completely decentralized. And it gives us some advantages because we can actually hold a coin, as a piece of data. And this is something that Chris here is trying to attack like hell. He's going to be our biggest pain. He's looking at attack vectors left, right and centre just now. Pretty good actually. But because that's a piece of data, the last owner is there who signs the fact the current owner owns that piece of data, so that's as Safecoin. So unlike Bitcoin, that means if I'm buying something from you, I'd send you Safecoins. What actually happens is I tell the network I want to transfer ownership of this to you, so me being the current owner, I'm allowed to sign it to the next new owner, which is you, but the network has that information. I didn't mean to shove you in the face. The network's over beside where Nick is. So you're always querying the network in an atomic fashion. Do I own that coin? And then when you want to send that coin to someone, you tell the network, and it goes through these consensus chains and using network atomicity, and signs that coin over to the other person. So it's like Bitcoin, but anonymous, and there's no ledger. So Bitcoin, to me, the Bitcoin blockchain is good as a public ledger. It would actually be better for registering things like land sales, car ownership, and all the rest of it. But I don't want everybody on the planet to know exactly who I've gave money to for what. So I think the public ledger aspect of Bitcoin is really important and really valuable for some things. It's not valuable for everything. And I kind of said before, it's like looking at the natural world. If we built everything on top of an amoeba, you know, you don't build a stag by putting antlers on an ant. You know, you create a completely new species for that. And This is why I think, we're doing with Maidsafe, we're creating a new species. And that species will live alongside the blockchain. There's a possibility, and we had a guy over from America at the weekend who's come up with a couple of different ideas. But one of the things that we would like to be able to do is know the exact network population, so we can remove some magic numbers for the code, and we might actually use the blockchain in the early days to do something like that. So we may have this coexistence in time, but not a codependence. So Safecoin is very like Bitcoin in terms of you can transfer wealth with it, but it's anonymous, and you can have several, it depends on the size of the network, billions of transactions per second. But my thing with it is, when you're running a computer, it will start creating Safecoin for you. And I'm really keen that allows us to amortize. There's a really interesting thing here, because we amortize the cost of all the resources across the network, but what we're actually doing is amortizing the ability of innovation across the world. Because you can now build a Dropbox without having to buy any resources. You just build one, shove it on the Maidsafe network, the kind of innovation of the internet, and become involved in the actual internet. Then we can do amazing things. If we can get the other 6 billion folk in the world using technology and give them access to it. One of the things I'd love to do is just create a wee USB live CD USB thing, shove Maidsafe on it, and just carpet bomb the whole Africa. And then folk can take these, shove them in any old computer, boot it up, log in, and they've got this humongous drive and the capability to get to all the information that we have. Because one of those guys potentially will cure a disease that one of us guys potentially will die of. So it's not really altruistic, it's a wee bit selfish. I want to kind of live forever. There's a good chance those other 6 billion folk know how to do that. So Safecoin's a pretty revolutionary part of the system.
Didn't it pressure in a wee bit there?
Yeah.
Because when you were describing, you're saying these nodes will just quiz the network.
Mm-hmm.
I thought in my head, I'm imagining a blockchain. A ledger, my apologies.
Mm-hmm.
And then you said, but it's not a ledger.
No.
And that's the bit that I'm
intrigued
by.
The coins themselves will have IDs.
Yeah.
So they'll start, it's a 32-bit number, so start all zeros, then 1, 0, 1, 1, So each coin will have an ID. So when I transmit a coin to you, it will have an ID like 101. You can query the network for coin 101 and check your names on it. So you're querying just that part of the network that's holding the 101 coin, and then someone else might have a 110 coin, which will be held at a different part of the...
So is that a fragmented ledger almost, is it?
Yeah, it's totally fragmented, and it means I don't need to be able to see what you spent to understand what I've got. So I'll have a wallet with a bunch of numbers in it, and I can query the network for those numbers. I could query the network for some other number that may be your coin, but all it would tell me is you've got that, you own that particular coin, and Joe Blogs owned it before you, but I don't know what happened with it, or who bought up with it, or whatever. So it's almost, if you imagine, the DHT network is a kind of XOR network. It's got all these addresses on it in XOR space, so it's kind of after I talk about it all the time, it's an XOR network. It's non-Euclidean, so if you take the numbers 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 4 is much closer to 1 than 5 is. It's got this weird way of being manipulated. But the good thing is you can find information very quickly, but you can distribute the information very quickly. So you just store things where that number is. We actually don't store things where the number is. I'm always lying. We store a pointer to where the thing should be, because where the number is could be a machine that's rubbish and not able to hold it, but it would be okay to hold a pointer. So we do a kind of indirection thing. But basically you query, it's like as if you had pound notes and you could phone up whoever it is that has the Royal Mint and give them a serial number and say who owns that pound note and tell you it's you. The network's doing just that.
So I get the idea of taking inspiration from decentralization. But some parts of nature are centralised, like our brain and spinal column, and our networks have evolved to mimic that.
I think it's centralisation and decentralisation is interesting, because you can see the whole world centralised from a cosmic perspective, and your own hair in your head is decentralised from a microscopic perspective. And I think it depends on the... I mean, I've seen a really good video about that, about your view, what you look at is depending on your view. So we see everything from this middle world view. I mean, if we were the size of an electron, you could spend your whole life in, you know, one cell of a fingernail and think that, you know, things are decent. So decentralisation, if you look inside your brain, the bunch of neurons in your brain are organised in a decentralised fashion. They're in the cells in your body are organised. It's like an ants colony, if you like. You could say that that's a centralised system because it's if you look at it from the colony, but if you go down and look at the ant, you can see it's part of something that's decentralised. And the way I think to understand decentralisation is to look at these systems and see that they just work using natural rules, just very simple natural rules. So if you can break the system down to where it's just the simplest of objects following simple rules, that's the kind of decentralised part. But then, like our bodies have trillions of cells, but you know, at one point a cell split and part of it went into this ear and part of it went down to that toe, and you wonder, how did that happen? Where did that intelligence come from? But we are probably a whole bunch of decentralised systems when you break it down, and when you go further apart, you know, it depends on, it's this world view. So I think decentralised and centralised very much a notion, because I know that when folk have debated things with me, they'll say, in fact, the guy at the weekend, I was talking about Amazon Dynamo, and he said, oh, it's centralised. How is it what's centralised within Amazon? You know, yeah, I suppose you could say that. So, yeah, I think it's a valid point, though.
Out of interest, you talked a lot about nature being your spur for what you're developing.
Yeah.
Do you find on the Maidsafe networks that you're working with just now, do you ever find your data doing like a flock of birds does it? You think it's going this way and it'll take its own decision to go and do itself somewhere?
I think the most alarming thing for us is what we do is we try, when we're doing code, we try and follow this kind of natural. So I have lots of debates with the guys because they're always trying to send a bit of information and get the answer, and that. So don't do that, just send information and see what happens. And what we've found is the more decentralised we look at it, the more we try and break everything down. So we don't even have a Merkle tree in our system. If we have a vector, it's a very local thing. We don't spread data across two nodes, which does drive folk mental. What we've found is we break things down, we remove the if statements, we remove all the conditions on the code, and we try and make sure the code algorithm's right for the particular function, like your eye focused or whatever. And when we get it, what we find is positive side effects. You know, generally people do a bit of code and they find side effects that are largely negative. It's all, shit, we'll have to fix this because that happened. What we find is when you get the algorithms as right as you can and just believe that they're going to be okay, you tend to get positive side effects, which is very good. But that's the kind of interesting thing. And the other thing, when you see the network starting up, when we had this in Python, and they start with this rank where they grow in rank, so the nodes with the better rank have got more authority. And in 2008 we actually set this, and it actually looks like a wee civilization by wee people growing into adults and then becoming responsible and looking after the new wee people. And that's pretty inspiring when you see that. But you actually, it means that you've coded something you don't know what it's going to do, really. And it can be really good.
You're talking about emergence there, and there's no kill switch, as I understand it.
Yeah.
I'm not suggesting it would become Skynet, but
I think it may.
Right, let's have that. Wherever you have emergence, obviously you don't know exactly what's going to happen.
No. I think this is evolution. And, you know, if you look at the world just now, if I ask most folk in here the top, the phone numbers of the top 5 people in their phone, they won't know because it's in the phone, you know, behind the name. And a lot of information's in Google, so you can see now there's a bit of a slip from us into the machine, which was actually one of the driving forces for me in the early days, saying my thoughts and creativity and all the rest of it have to be mine, you know, and I can share them when I've developed them or whatever. They shouldn't belong to someone else. So this server-based thing, it was a big thing. People shouldn't own your thoughts. If people own your thoughts and then regulate your thoughts, like what you're allowed to do in Google and what you're allowed to, then to me you start becoming robotic. And when you become robotic and follow rules, it means you stop innovating. When you stop innovating, we start dying as a species. So it's, to me, really important. In terms of moving forward, you know, we've been here hardly any time at all as humans, and I don't think we're all that particularly smart. And as things move on, I can see more of our cognitive functions going into networking and computers and thoughts and things for us. You know, like what's my name and stuff like that. They will, there will be this passover of where is the intelligence? You know, and is it intelligent to remember a phone number, so is our phone smarter than us now in terms of phone number remembering? And I think all those things are going to become really interesting. In terms of Skynet type things, maybe the natural evolution for humans is machines, I don't know. I really don't. I wouldn't be scared of it if it was. We're certainly not building something to do that, but I think naturally, I'm sure the phone companies didn't build something to suck the remembering phone numbers out of our head. I think that could be a natural thing that happens as we move along. It's certainly a way for me to live forever. I quite like that, like a UPS.
Just not worry and do it and see what happens.
Yeah, I think we have to. I think evolution will just drive us. If we don't do it, someone will. But this is, to me, it seems to be the right path forward. Is to, and folk, you know, when I started talking at Maidsafe years ago, folk saying, I don't really care about privacy, I don't care about security, like, this is all bullshit what you're doing. And then you can ask a few simple questions, which is interesting to inspire what kind of thought thing. When you think of any future in any movie or film that you see or TV series, you never see Scotty pulling his laptop out, logging into Google to send a message to Captain Kirk. Minority Report things. There's one thing that's common with all of those. The computer's the computer. You know, it's not our computer, you don't want to log in and get your own stuff. There's a computer somewhere, and the hardware part of it has just become commoditized, it maybe not even existent. I always remember that when Scotty walked up with a keyboard, how great. But when you actually think about our future, we know our future isn't server-based systems. We know our future's this great, big, intelligent thing that gives us information. But we can't see it in our everyday life, because certainly all the people who were trained in computers and trained in computer science and trained, right, here's a network, here's how it works, you go here, you log into that server and somebody's going to screw your data. That's it. You know, it'll probably not work sometimes. And we're actually trained to do that. And it's like the folk who are trained to pull sledges along until somebody came to a wheel and said, why don't you fire one of these on it? And, what are you talking about, you madman? And when I think when you have a kind of jump in innovation like this, it's quite tricky to explain to folk. I was talking to somebody recently and talking about the phone. When the phone came out, you imagine going to a VC all those years ago and saying, I've got this great business model, we're going to charge folk to talk into a bit of Bakelite. You know, when you think about it, the word phone didn't exist. How are you going to explain what that thing is? So, big innovations, you know, I think require an element of mentalness and dedication. But it's also this ability to look at what other folk are actually seeing and not recognising. And then when they see what you've done, they'll think, oh, that's obvious, that should have been done before.
I have a question. It's, I'm not technical, so I'm just going to ask.
That's okay. We just get on.
From analytic point of view, you mentioned basically having statistics or data available, but there's no centralized control. So how would that work from the aspect of would each individual could run queries on the entire network?
Yeah.
They could?
Yeah.
Okay.
So on top of what you can't search the network at the networking layer, so you can't do a range-based search on the data elements of the chunks, but on the top of that, you'll have public information. So like on Maidsafe, you should go to anyone's computer and just type Safecoin and then that person's name, and you'll see all their data and their websites and blogs, and all of that can be in there. I was looking at a peer-to-peer search system today actually, but all of that information can be indexed just like today's. But hopefully you can also index medical information, and holomorphic encryption's come a long way as well. So if medical information could be on a privacy enhancing network, and one thing I noticed about humans is we don't really mind giving machines data very much. You know, we can put our card in machines and stuff like that and type stuff into our calculators, and we don't really mind machines because we know that they're not really corrupted, you know, unless you're using an operating system for routing. But anyway, we don't really bother about machines, so I think that there's an opportunity potentially for medical record sharing throughout the world in a way that we're guaranteed to be maintaining our privacy and allowing much better clinical data to be gathered. And that's going to be a pretty interesting and exciting part of it.
So, not really. I just have to congratulate you on what you've done. It's really brilliant. You know, you've seen it for a couple of years now and been following what you've been doing. I'm interested in protocols. Always have been. You know, agreements.
Yeah.
Everything's an agreement. I mean, everything's an agreement. Amazon's an agreement. It just happens to be a toxic
Is
one.
a disagreement an agreement?
It is. It's a government. The government's an agreement. And what I've been working on for the last 15 years, well, what does the next generation of decentralised agreements look like? And that's what I'm doing at UCL among other places, you know. And I think we're just at the end of the beginning. We need to look, what do we mean by value anyway? I heard somebody describe, somebody wrote that money was the mathematics of value. And that's an interesting expression. What is property? What is money? Well, we're used to thinking of them as objects, but they're not. They're relationships bound around by protocols. Okay. How do we actually use your fabulous methodology, and I'm not even sure what to call it, what you do, but what frameworks do we actually describe our existing reality to actually get there to the next generation? I think we're about that far away.
Yeah,
I think we're that far away, and I think Scotland is the place where it will happen.
Yeah.
And Bitcoin, we're all here assembled with looking at Bitcoin. But, you know, to me, I'm going immediately beyond that. What interests me about that is the protocol, but you've already gone beyond the protocol, in a sense. You know, you're talking peer-to-peer, but what about peer-to-asset? You know, what about a coin that you can actually return against use of land? Then you're into issues of property and 500 people owning Scotland. You know, that sort of dialogue. What about energy and the use of energy? And instead of paying for past production of energy, which I'm afraid is what Bitcoin does, what about a promise of future production of energy? Now that to me is valuable. That to me is the currency of the future. How then do we measure the transactions that we do? These are all questions that need answered, and I think the answers are emerging quickly. But I think you're right. I mean, within this room and around, you know, in Scotland, from what I've seen, that's why I'm here and not in London, you know, which to me, the UK has become what I call a pornocracy. It's a government by harlots, basically. And, you know, we've got to come up with a different way of doing it. Sorry, on a bit of a rant here, but...
No, I totally agree. I think the first step is to get that mental freedom, and that freedom to innovate and dream and take pressure away from people and remove some of the rules and some of the stifling things that we face on a daily basis. And that's got to be the first way. But we're speaking to a lot of different projects throughout the world just now, and there's one that's really interesting, Moneytas, they're based in Switzerland. And the chap there is phenomenal. But there's actually an international law which was set out in 1927 called Odin. Yes, sorry, I can't remember the name of it, but there's about 7 parts to the law, and it's universally accepted law. Moneytas are building that into a system where you can basically click 7 things and create a contract, and they've actually had that validated in the courts in the legal place in London and New York and in Switzerland.
Courts are so last century.
Yeah, it's international law can be very interesting because you can actually do international contracts and agreements now. So you could decide to pay someone on the other side of the world with a legally binding contract with a currency that just shoots straight through.
Have you come across Ricardian contracts? Stuff that Ian
Yeah.
Briggs doing, for instance.
Yeah, it's a similar thing, and that's Dark Wallet. I was talking to Veer Taki earlier on. Dark Wallet's doing exactly that. And the Maidsafe network supports all of those things, which is great. But yeah, I think it's having the ability to do this stuff at almost no cost and without fear, and in a privacy enhancing way, I think is important. Because what we can do is we can try stuff really, really fast and fail really, really fast, and then try the next thing. And that's got to be the way forward.
I think the great thing about Manitas as well, that the chat that runs it's not altruistic, but it has similar values to us, and he's got other ways of making money, but there's going to be literally less than 1 cent transaction costs for these contracts. So when he's sitting there telling you just think this is going to totally revolutionise how business is done, I think it's really, law gets in the way, I think, a lot of time of maybe 2 small businesses in different parts of the world actually doing business together, because there's just different jurisdictions and lawyers are expensive and they screw you over, etc., etc. So I think businesses and like that are really going to be changing the world, and I think we're probably going to go over and see them in the next couple of months. But there'll be a lot of things like that coming out, I think.
Can I just ask you, you mentioned you've got a private key to get into the network.
What happens is you type in a password which recovers a block of data, and that block of data you put another password and decrypt it, and that gives you it gives you about 21 key pairs, and you take one of those key pairs and that's your ID. It's an anonymous ID. We connect to the network with that.
Originally I started using Dropbox for a project, so you have a group of people sharing data. Do you have the same facility to get more than one person getting into that private?
Yeah, there's 3 types of data in terms of, there's no this types of data, but there's 3 types of shares. So there's your individual private data, and then there's public data, which is read-only to the world, and then there's private shares. So
private shares.
You can share within a group. So that's fine.
I wish I had a product we're working on for that called Work Stuff, and we're trying to build that function to basically take, like Dropbox for Teams, and basically set that within the Maidsafe network. So
I mean, that's why I used Dropbox. It's brilliant to begin with. No problems at all.
Yeah.
But what you're doing is just it's great.
First, I just want to echo Benjamin over this sentiments. I think you guys are doing incredible work.
Thanks a lot.
You made a statement that you consider the internet to be everything above level 3, so in other words, cables and up. To what extent does Maidsafe interact with TCP/IP? Where are the lines? At what point are you guys creating a stag as opposed to
That's
putting
a
antelope
terrific
on the
question.
putting?
We had to rewrite part of what we've done is written a thing called reliable UDP.
Okay.
So it's a sort of TCP emulation over UDP to give us, it gives us a lot more speed, but allows us to do NAT traversal, go through firewalls and whatnot. And the UDP packet that you see it's a UDP header with a fully encrypted payload, so you can't tell it's Maidsafe traffic, which is a sneaky way for us to not to be banned from anywhere.
Handy.
Yeah.
Okay,
Yeah, so
brilliant.
it's all the way from UDP up.
Okay, gotcha.
So, obviously the whole capitalism with fiat money, meaning that you don't want to be an author, you want to be Amazon. You don't want to do anything, you want to be a bank. In fact, you don't want to be a bank, you want to be a hedge fund. The more abstracted you are from the value, the more you can control the capital, and the people that actually do stuff and are creative get screwed over. and that whole idea of some of the open source currencies and local currencies and things, not Bitcoin related, but I'm sure you've that stuff as well. Trying to, how can we trade with each other with local currencies and earn money into existence rather than having to borrow money, so that you and I want to start a business and you borrow 100 grand from a bank to start a business and I borrow 100 grand, and just before we can even trade with each other, that's 200 grand that we owe, up the chain. It seems like this is an opportunity for people to actually be creative and earn money without needing to rely on the old forms of fiat associated capitalism.
Well, I think that's really important.
So the next question is, so one of the things I'm doing here is, we're in this position where I'd love to pull the rug out from all of that stuff, but I've got a whole bunch of startups, and I want to shoot myself sometimes because I see a lot of crap as well, don't get me wrong, but there's some genuinely incredible stuff bubbling up that is not getting any cash because it's too interesting and unusual, or the kind of people who would normally write a check, an angel investor or a government or whatever, can't necessarily spot the value in that, and so a lot of this stuff's dying off. And so yes, I'm trying to get foreign capital, so investors from around the world who are a bit more switched on to do that, but I'm still operating under the current form of money. I would love there to be a way, and I think this may be it, that we could have projects that could get funded because we could decide that it was awesome. And I'm wondering whether that's something that we could think more deeply about.
That's the thing I've discussed. The Crypto Academy, we're keen to set up a Crypto Academy in Scotland. We've got people who will fund that from America and pull things together. So there are some funds available. All that we need to show is that we're good, we're capable, and we're willing. And I think we can do that. And if we can present a really good face to the rest of the world, because funding in Scotland is a bit of a disaster. The angel funds are pretty small generally, and a lot of them are maybe builders and stuff like this. And what we miss is the sort of tech funding, like real deep funding. And we recently took on Michael Jackson to our board, who's one of the Skype CEO guy. He's got access to lots of funds, and there's lots of people chasing us about just now from all over the world, so VCs and whatnot, and we can certainly try and help there to just get the word about that there's these other Scottish projects that are interesting. And I think we need to just look at ourselves and say the funding isn't here, it's not here just now, we don't have it. So if some of us can get big and successful, can we first of all please fund local companies, because that would be amazing. Can we start this cycle going? I almost personally would ignore all Scottish funding. I think it comes with far too many ties, and it's not healthy funding, and we have to do something different. If we can alter that funding model, and if that takes us in the crypto world or whatever, I think it's something we need to look at.
I think the foundation's worth mentioning as well.
Yeah.
Put a lot of your shares into the Maidsafe Foundation, which is a registered Scottish charity, which for the cynical amongst you, it's not a tax dodge, it's genuinely there to help fund innovation, and the intention is the largest shareholder in Maidsafe, so as Maidsafe starts to pay dividends, this will start to hopefully become one very well funded organisation that's genuinely there to try and make a difference. So the intention there will be to help other charities that will help fund future businesses.
One of the things that it was the first Fab Lab in Scotland, and the Maidsafe Foundation will fund you by basically giving you everything for nothing. It'll give you a place to work, it'll give you some cash to live on, it'll just take the pressure off you and do magic. We'll take the stress off if you can just provide the magic. That's the only deal that we ask. In terms of it's in Troon just now, part of the deal is you have to look after the folk that's in the Fab Lab, because the Fab Lab's for kids and whatnot to come in and just build whatever they can dream. So, but we need to do a lot more of that, an awful lot more. But there are people out there looking to fund exciting projects, and there's actually not as many exciting projects as you would imagine. They're certainly not coming for Scotland just now, which is, I just keep mentioning this, we should be doing something better than what we're doing. But we're out there, we've got a bit of fame and a bit of publicity, and there's a great community, and we're more than happy full ride on our coattails to get some of that, and it's a given.
At the end of the day, it doesn't come down to money though, does it? Because money never built anything.
Belief is your main thing.
Well, to me it comes down to credit and money's worth. You know, you said yourself, you can give something for free. Well, you know, at the end of the day, if you've got a credit for the use of an office, if you've got a credit for the use of anything that you need, that credit is based on something real, not some banks say so or governments say so. How can we mobilise credit is what interests me. And what frameworks, what protocols can we actually do that within? What frameworks of trust can we do it? So, you know.
I think our biggest thing is, so I was asked years ago about it, and the biggest thing is belief. And
well, credit means he believes.
Yeah, I think even turn around to the guy beside you and just say, this is amazing what you're doing, is there anything I can do to help you, and I hope you're successful. That's something that we lack, I think, in this country. If you're over on the West Coast and you start a business, the guy next to you is probably likely to kick your face rather than shake your hand. So the whole belief in each other is hugely important, and that tiny bit of encouragement that you can give to someone and try and do it as often as possible is a huge strength. It's worth millions, actually. But we're used to it because we're Scottish. This is what happens, and, you know. But I think the belief in trying to get rid of some of the stress and all the kind of ideas you're talking about, and all together are what we should be doing. But what we tend to do here is we'll say, that's a great idea, and then we'll all go back and sit in our own house, in our own office, and not do anything about it. So we should try and get things done.
On that, I'm sorry,
I just wanted to ask, where is the Maidsafe network as we speak? Because I don't mean literally.
It's on our hub.
I was looking at something version 0 or something.
We're moving it. There's two tracks just now. There's testnets and there's examples. So testnet 1's the network we're putting out just now. So there'll be 3 testnets, 6 weeks each roughly, and then it's fully live. The examples, example 0 was the other day, which is just a network. Example 1 I think should be tomorrow. And the examples are for all the people who want to build applications. So you build the example and you've got the API, you can build your application. I think the guys were doing some today, which I don't know what day this is.
Monday.
Is this Monday? Oh, it'll be Friday. The Friday example 1 will do it probably. So the three networks of 6 weeks each, approximately.
And then when did you say it was going to be live?
Just at the end of those 18 weeks.
Yeah.
18 weeks-ish.
Yeah, as the guys were saying, we're lucky to have you on our doorstep. And is there any way that we can continue taking advantage of that? So for instance, because you've tapped into understanding this decentralization issue through the Bitcoin, there's probably a lot of Bitcoiners that are fascinated by what you're doing and would love to get involved, but are not really that technical, or they're technical in other areas, but maybe not here. I once upon a time was quite technical, and I find it a bit difficult to get through things. So for instance, I would love to be a tester on the testnet, but I know that because your documentation isn't the best in the world yet, I know I will have difficulty, and I wonder how many other people would love to support you in Scotland. Is there any way that we can network, and you've got a core of guys that could go out and teach some other guys who go out and eventually reach me and some others that could.
The best way really to be in touch with us is maidsafe.org, which is a community website. And which was great. After the crowd sale, someone set it up, and someone set up a Safecoin.org, and they let us in. But I'm just a normal user on it, which is great. It's like junior user or something, which I love. But it's great. It's got loads of really good people and ideas for projects and how we can all help each other, and there's quite an up-to-date what we do on a weekly basis. Like, this is good. We try and hold our weekly meetings openly on Google Hangout and stuff, but they're a bit of a disaster. We're not very good at it. But we make as much information as public as possible on maidsafe.org, so all of our meetings, and hopefully they'll be done through Mumble, which is a sort of Skype thing, over the next few weeks. So
it could well be as the developer, and there's a pod set up here that you might not even have to traverse Scotland to keep in touch. You know, there'll be a little kind of local pod here of builders and core developers that can chat and come up with their own ideas.
That's the sort of thing I mean, because I visit Maidsafe.org and the other quite regularly, and I still don't feel as if there's a barrier there that okay, maybe I'm just a numpty, but I'm finding it a bit of a hurdle to get in it, And whereas maybe, sorry?
I was going to say, I wonder if it's harder as well when there's not an actual network there to go in and play. And once there's applications that you can actually go and touch and feel, I think that will aid. You're absolutely right, the documentation's not the best, and we've kind of toyed with ideas of technical writers and stuff, but we're just so few of us, and such a big task to do. I think once there's a network there, it will maybe make that leap not quite so vast.
We're more than happy to come over here, and if there is groups of people to chat to and do stuff.
I ran up against a paradox many years ago when I set up a .com a long time ago. And I set up something that everybody wanted to use. Everybody wanted to own it. If anybody owned it, nobody else would use it. And I called it the liquidity neutrality paradox. If it's neutral, it's not liquid, and if it's liquid, it's not neutral. How do you get to market with something like Maidsafe? How do you get to market without compromising?
Make the market cry out for it. So the crowd sale, that was one of the big things for us. It was turn the technology push into a market pool, make people scream for it, and then eventually give them it. So no, we're trying really hard to get it out quickly, but that was the key for us, was really to make it something that people wanted, which really translated into just tell folk what it is. And there seems to be a natural desire for the ability to just take back the internet. It's ours. We're having it. We're not letting anybody else have it ever again. So the kind of turning stuff into a
Everyone will be selling their shares on Facebook and Google and Amazon because we'll have the Maidsafe versions.
I certainly hope so.
We're not authorised to give investment advice.
But yeah.
Question on the data storage. So, if I understand correctly, when data is stored decentralized, there's no central ledger. So there has to be some sort of multiplier, so the data is not stored. One instance probably 10,000s. So what's the algorithm for data propagation in the light of failing nodes? So let's say 10% of the network, just people turn off their PCs or whatever happens.
We actually depend on that.
So what's the mechanism for propagation of the data? But the data that's encrypted and it's important to you, let's say it's medical records, but it's not gone forever from the system. Because it has to be stored somewhere physically on a physical
That's right. You've just got to make it. See, the whole thing's a probability network, like the whole of nature really is. And you've just got to make the probability of data loss beyond possible. You can have a probability, but beyond a feasible thing. So there's 4 copies of data at any stage, each chunk of data. If the network's global, the data should distribute evenly across that network, should be in multiple continents. The 4 nodes round about any piece of data will know between 20 milliseconds and 10 seconds that node's gone off and make another copy. And the chance of losing all 4 copies at once is almost none.
Self-propagate.
It's self-propagating. Yeah. So the nodes closest straight away make another copy. If another copy's needed, there's actually there's between 2 and 6 live copies and up to 16 dead copies. So a node may go off that was holding a live copy, but there's enough dead copies we don't even bother propagating it, because the chances are one or the other dead nodes will come back live again. So there's up to 22 copies of each chunk of data, but between 2 and 6.
Sounds like Game of Life.
Pardon?
Sounds like Game of Life with data.
Yeah, that's quite like it. That's quite like it. It's almost like data, if you imagine. It's like, I kind of think of it as throwing something into a bowl of water and it finds its own way because of this live dead copies. If you might be a machine that's only on for 2 hours a day, but be miraculously good at holding someone's medical record who happens to be wanting it for only those 2 hours a day. You know, and the data will find that correct place, but it does it in a random way, which is again like the ant thing. Because if you watch ants and you see them, like this road's got poison, this road's got food, every so often an ant will go up the poison road, and they have to see if it's still poison, they die. But at some stage that poison will have turned into food. So you randomly have to keep poking the edges of the thing, and that's what the data does.